welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. We have the author of this book, The Last Frontier, Exploring the Afterlife and Transforming Our Fear of Death, Julia Assante. Julia has a very interesting background. She is a scholar of Near Eastern studies, and she has learned languages that some of us have never even heard of, from Sumerian languages, perhaps Linear B, Akkadian, and others. And even in the midst of all of this, her love of the exploration of the relationship of life and death has really dominated her psyche. And it happens that all along the way, she has been cultivating and has been gifted with a series of mediumship types of skills. She is a psychic, she's a medical intuitive. And even though this is in major contradistinction from her scholarly work, it happens still to be true. And more she is showing this part of her nature and sharing it with the world. So it's very powerful and very beautiful. Larry Dawsey, Dr. Dawsey, who we had on this show some time ago, wrote the introduction, the foreword. And this book is very impactful. In fact, Publishers Weekly Review said of it, and I don't have the quote in my hands, but in essence, it is the most powerful book on death that has been written and published since the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So just put that in your pipe and smoke it, and you get some sense of what it is we're dealing with. I know for myself, I have been enjoying what I have read so far very much. It's getting right to the heart of the matter, and I'm so glad that you're here on the show today.
And I'm so glad to be here.
Good.
So glad to be with you.
Excellent, excellent. I'm so glad. So what is it that really, let's get into what inspired you in the first place and then go into some of the depth of what you've written up here.
Well, I was born in deep mourning, and I think that was the setup.
Really?
Yes.
How so? How were you?
My mother's infant boy died just before I was conceived, and her father died while she was carrying me, so she was going through a lot of questions in deep mourning, which naturally, even in the prenatal, I'm going to pick up.
Yeah, of course.
From the early 70s, I started working as a professional intuitive, and you routinely get dead folk come in and give a little message here and there.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1983...
And was that easy for you to do? Was that like...
It should be easy for any professional. In
Yes.
fact, audience,
Any credentialed
it's easy
psychic.
for everybody. That's really the message.
Yeah,
we all have
right.
these abilities, but it's
In
just
fact,
for me
you
expecting...
teach
That's right.
workshops
Yeah.
teaching people to
Yeah.
be their own medium,
yeah.
literally a medium between worlds.
It's much more powerful to have the direct contact than to go through someone else. And when you go through someone else, when that someone else is gone, you feel disempowered. Helplessness and grief are very closely allied. So there's very often a resurgence of grief after going to a
Not only
medium.
that, I have one more question.
Yeah,
You know,
right,
what do you
right.
do then? Right. So in other words, you don't need a middleman.
No.
Right.
No.
Which, I know and we know, don't we?
Do we?
We should
We
by
should.
now.
It's a natural ability, and it's been documented from the early Sumerian cuneiform type of material, these little clay tablets.
Yeah.
But it was outlawed in the 7th, 8th century BC under the King Josiah's reforms in Jerusalem. The developing cult of Yahweh is what made necromancy punishable by death by stoning. And that's where it left our society. It closed up the afterworld because the divine, the dead were considered divine, they were considered Elohim, and that meant competition with this so-called jealous God and the God of the living. He was known by both of those things. He had nothing to do with the afterlife. And therefore, in Orthodox Judaism, there was no afterlife. There wasn't any. Biblical stuff is very complicated on death, and the afterlife is very obscure. It's contradictory. But if you think about it, just think about this, in the story of creation, death is a punishment. And you're not expected to resurrect. You're not expected to reunite with the divine. It's a punishment. It's not even part of a natural cycle. So we've inherited all of this from the Judeo-Christian inheritance, It's also in Islam, which has complicated things tremendously in terms of our beliefs in our own native abilities.
I mean, all these three religious inheritances,
Yeah.
institutional
The Abrahamic religions,
thinking.
right.
There is, however, at least in Hasidim, the idea of reincarnation.
Yeah.
So how does that figure into what you're saying?
Well, Hasidim are much later developments.
Yeah,
They're
surely.
Eastern European,
Of
and
course.
there was a reincarnation also in Christianity.
Sure, I know that, before the Vatican
Yeah.
Council.
And in some, you could argue that resurrection is another way of looking at reincarnation as well.
That's right, exactly. So those were certainly templates that were formed very early on in the trajectory. So they just were eliminated from conversation?
What exactly was eliminated?
Reincarnation and
yeah.
resurrection stayed around. I mean,
Yes, but now
at least for one Jew.
in terms of apocalypticism, it stayed around. And many people expect still an apocalypse. That's true even in Islam. Certainly more fundamentalist Christians do. But look what we did recently with the Mayan calendar. There's always the expectation of the end of the world. So we really haven't gotten rid of that at all. It's still there.
Okay, so this is very interesting, but this is a road that let's not go down any further now.
All right.
Only not for lack of interest, but
Yeah.
because I would like to get more into the essence of what your book is really addressing, rather than looking at the kind of the cultural attitudes and
Well, the cultural attitudes, because this book is so much geared towards eliminating the fear of death.
yeah.
I do talk about cultural attitudes to a great extent, but also the secular ways we're exploited by this fear.
Yeah, I mean, if I could sum it up, this is what I'm hearing, Julia, that based on death being snubbed by the great Abrahamic religions,
Yeah, right.
we lost our natural relationship with affinity to that very natural part of the process
Beautifully
of the
said.
end cycle of life.
And
Yeah.
we have pathologized death.
Oh, God, yes.
Okay, so that's from the other sector.
That's right.
We've turned it into
That's a natural
disease.
consequence
Yeah.
of not dealing.
Yeah, it's a consequence also of materialism. Material
Yeah,
realism. is-
right,
yeah.
exactly, of a whole lot of things, exactly.
So we're really-
So you're reviving, you're resurrecting.
I'm hoping.
You are resurrecting the subject, and of course a lot of people have, thank goodness. I mean, even the existentialists in their way, right, have brought forth invited a new way of looking at relating to death, and certainly you do that here.
Oh, yeah.
So that in itself, believe me, this is monumental in itself, and I applaud it. I'd like to get into sort of the depth, the bones, if you will, of what you are presenting when you teach and what you're speaking of here. What do you want people to really digest?
I want people to start seeing themselves and experiencing life as though they were already immortal and not waiting until they die. That's what I really want. And once that's even remotely in place, life changes, the values of a person change entirely. The whole idea of gain and competition and what people think of you, all that goes away, and you become your authentic self. Now, communication with the dead is meeting the authentic self raw. You're meeting the authentic, immortal self raw, because that's who all those people are who passed on. And that is an experience that is life-changing, and the effects of it increase over time. After-death communication, which I teach, and it is, as I said, and I'm going to say it again to the audience, everyone has these abilities. It can be so outstandingly healing that it's hard to believe. There are more bereavement counselors using induced after-death communication therapy. There are other kinds of therapists who are using it, and it's been able to knock out 4 decades of post-traumatic stress disorder in a matter of a session. It's just, if we let the dead in, they can reconcile with us, they can change your lives, and you end up with a living relationship, as I have with my family and many deceased friends, in which I become the daughter of these immortal people who are the way they are now is the way they want me to know them. It's really important for the dead that we see them as they really are, without all the petty fears and anxieties and conflicts that we knew them with while they were in the flesh. It's a really important thing because we dismiss the deceased.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you really look traditionally to other than the Abrahamic cultures, although it's there too, actually, is the appreciation of the ancestors.
Yes, and that was knocked out. That was knocked out also. Ancestor worship was completely killed.
That was knocked
Judaism.
out. But in Judaism, I can only tell you that when I was in Jerusalem studying, which I was for a brief period some years back, there were some rabbis there and other just religious Jews who could trace the family lineage. You would just give them your last name and the location, like in my case, the area of Kiev, and they go, oh yes, of course, Rabin was related to Rabinowitz, was related to Rabinowitz. And they went through
Ancestor.com and after-death communication.
Oh, I'm not talking about communication right now. Right, I'm just talking about the honoring of the ancestors is huge in Judaism today.
No, the way ancestor worship is what it's
I'm not talking about worship.
The way
I'm
that was
talking about
construed
honoring.
was
Yeah.
honoring is different from communication.
Oh, yes.
Before these reforms, there was ongoing communication. The dead were buried under their house.
Yes, indeed.
Right? All of that got knocked out. It got changed. Communication was forbidden. The mourning rites were stopped. There was a complete break. And so when you're talking about ancestors in the way you are now, you're talking about ancestors as they were in the body. The difference between honoring your ancestors in the way you've just been talking about it, and honoring the ancestors in the way I'm talking about it, is that what you're talking about is a genealogy of living people, and what I'm talking about is honoring those as they are dead, in the death state. There's a huge difference between these two views.
Oh yes, no. I'm talking about people who have passed on. I'm talking about the lineage of a family going back to They think about the House of David.
Yeah, but you can do that and be a totally atheistic and have no belief in that.
Very true.
Right.
Very true. Very true. But I'm just saying that inside Judaism is respect and honor of the dead,
the lineage,
and
not
the
the
honor.
dead, the lineage.
Well,
okay.
That's not
it's a
altogether
terminology
true.
thing.
Yeah.
They're not talking about what I'm talking about is that they did rituals for the dead. They spoke to the dead.
I'm not talking about that at all.
I know.
I'm just
That's
talking
what I'm
about
trying to say.
honoring.
Right.
It's entirely, I'm not talking about communication.
Right.
But I understand that was part of the expression exorcised from perhaps these Abrahamic religions early on for any number of reasons that you're citing.
Yeah.
Economic, political, and otherwise. Just
very political.
Utter
very political.
fear, could be, So I understand that. If you go over, of course, to the Indonesians or the Chinese or the Indians, you've got an entirely different perspective on. That's ancestor worship. In fact, feng shui really developed out of placing, you probably know this, the burying of the dead so close to the home for the contact.
Right.
Most people don't realize that, but it's a really interesting thing.
There are African cultures where they build a house for the dead, or they keep a house they were in empty because the dead want to still be with the community.
Oh, got it.
But in our society, all of that is sequestered. All that's put away. And we put people in hospitals. We don't want to see it. Doctors turn their backs on people who are dying because they're hopeless cases. And we really separate dramatically from that. And we're suffering from it. We're
really
suffering
true,
tremendously from it.
Perhaps
from
one
the
of
lack
the
of continuity. That's one of the reasons why people... And by the way, that kind of fear produces a lot more pain when one's dying. Because without the fear, the pain is very minimal.
Wow. So when you said before, Julia, that recognition of our own immortality in life all of a sudden basically dissolves or disappears the fear of death, could you just talk about that a little bit?
Well, when you think about it, imagine a perspective in which you realize that this moment is a very tiny thing. And the physical experience is also rather small. I mean, the non-physical is massive. So you look at this point in time in terms of its relevance for your entire eternal self, and suddenly you become playful. A lot of things don't matter. The ache and pain that you have in your body who cares? You're still walking? Fine. Don't worry about it. There's no focus on all of those things.
Or it could be if your name is Woody Allen, you could say, oh, yeah, I'm going to be suffering like this forever.
Right. Which you don't, people. Don't listen to him. All that goes
It's not
away
me, it's
after
Woody
death.
Allen.
Right.
I'm kidding. No, of course.
Right.
You go from being highly hyper-focused on the micro of this life with a beginning and an end to relax.
Yeah. And the petty dramas, which seem to us so significant, you don't waste time on it anymore.
For me, one of the ways I use death, which I use it all the time in my own personal life, and
it's very useful, death.
It's so useful, and in my practice with clients and counseling and coaching and all, is I say, remember, Nietzsche's great words, live as though the day were here, where you can get the sense that if I look at my life from the point of view of my death, then is what I'm bickering about today, right now, so worth it?
Yeah, or is it an excuse too? All the excuses we make because of our fear to not do things. When you lose the fear of death, you take more risks.
Yes, right.
You don't regard the body as a time bomb, so you get healthier because you trust it more.
Yeah.
There's so many things that go on. But I teach a workshop like that where I take people through their deaths.
Yes, I love this. I
A friend of mine,
really think this is just
a friend of mine, Eric,
so quintessential.
said to me once, he said, Julia, live it up. You only have a few thousand lives. And that sort of says it all for me.
Well, before the show, I pointed out to you my dear friend and teacher of Tai Chi Chuan, Bob Loomish, nice Jewish intelligent sage from Long Island. And he said, you're doomed to live.
Yes. Yeah.
Same idea, right?
There's another one. The leading cause of death is birth.
And that reminds me of the wonderful idea that I learned from Eckhart Tolle, which is the opposite of life is not death. It's the opposite of birth is death. So you've got a portal in and a portal through.
I wouldn't call them opposites at all.
Okay.
In fact, sometimes when I do private sessions
I
with
said
people...
that. I added that.
Oh, okay.
I don't think he did.
When I do private sessions, the dead and the preborn show up together. The idea of it being an afterlife is a misnomer. It isn't. It's a non-local reality in which anything that's not focused and physical is there. This is massive. And by the way...
I'm so glad you're saying this is really where I wanted to go with
this is huge.
Yeah.
By the way, what we are as human beings, as matter... If I took all the atoms, all the space out of the atoms in your body, just as you're sitting here, just the space alone, the amount of matter that would be left would be an extremely small microscopic dot. So that's really all that separates us from the non-physical. We are projections, we are light shows.
Holographic images.
And the dead are too. And we have the same consciousness, we have the same abilities for telepathy and communication, etc. and so forth. So there's very little that really separates us from those dimensions.
You mean, could you say that the thing that really separates us is the fact that we happen to be encased, if physically embodied?
No, I wouldn't even say that is it.
No?
I say it's fear that separates us. Absolutely. I've been doing these workshops with people teaching people to do after-death communication. I've been doing them all over the country and in Europe. And so far, everyone's done it. Everyone's achieved communication. Now figure that out.
Yeah.
Figure that out. And we don't realize how often we have it all the time anyway. And the statistics are, just for spontaneous encounters with the dead, 72% of the American population, which is wrong. It's much higher because we're not including children, people on deathbeds who routinely see the deceased. And all the other varieties of encounters were not brought into the mix. They certainly didn't include anything that has to do with mediumship or these therapies I was just telling you about. So if you start to add all that up, you're looking at 100%, and that is exactly as it should be. Why? Relationships don't stop with the body. Nothing stops with the body. Nothing dies.
Right. Nothing stops. Nothing dies.
Nothing
right?
dies.
Like, just as we know from Einstein et al., energy is never destroyed.
Right.
And we are energy, so it's just a syllogism.
Yeah. But it's organized energy. And we know from near-death experiences, for instance, that when a person leaves the body, their perceptions are much greater than they were when they're in the body. All their perceptual skills are there. Their consciousness moves at lightning speed, faster than in the body. Congenitally blind people who are so blind from birth that they've never even had a dream about light, let alone ever seen it, can see once they're out of the body. Yes, the body imposes certain restraints. However, those restraints are mostly learned. If you regress somebody into infancy well, if you do a good regression, that infant will see, let's say you, not as solid, but as a waving form. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is a learn, it's a mass consciousness thing. And we can turn a great deal of that around. Yeah. Now, what's making a lot of these changes happening is technology.
Explain.
Yeah. Technology is forcing us to, let's think of the telephone. Think of Alexander Graham Bell in Philadelphia introducing the telephone to the world for the first time. And he's using, of all things, Hamlet's soliloquy with the skull, right? And he is talking to a disembodied voice no one can see from a distance. And people were in terror in the audience that he was conjuring ghosts. But this alone changed everything.
Oh, so you're saying that technology is acting essentially as an analog for our understanding
it's a
potential.
catapult. And I think, too, that the constant proximity with digital, electronic, is teaching us to be more and extraordinarily sensitive in a way never known to electrical impulses. And all this is about electrical impulses. All perception is electrical impulse.
So would you say, Julia, that disembodied beings, is that a fair thing to say? Okay.
Nice.
Still have their sensory apparatus as we know it in a body intact?
Oh, more so than in
plus.
I mean, plus. Yeah. And they can use it in different ways.
How do you understand that phenomenon? Because there aren't eyes, there aren't ears.
They're right.
I
teach a workshop.
Medium.
I teach a workshop that is designed to get people to use what I call the proto-biological senses. Oh. And that is the sense that of the consciousness of visual perception is there. Without that, the eye organ, the physical organ, can't work. But you can see without the physical organ. So there is in your consciousness an embedded array of senses. Now these senses can be mixed, and more people are noticing that we're doing it. This is called synesthesia.
Synesthesia.
Yeah. When you're in the afterlife, it gets outrageous in terms of using these things, where you can become whatever you sense too.
Yes.
But mixing them, I've
talking
been
about
able
virtual reality.
Right. I've been able to. I smell centuries sometimes. There's a smell that comes over me when, that must be the medieval period.
Right.
Or you can combine several senses.
There's that darn 19th century again.
Smell again. Fumigate the house.
Britain.
Right. No, not even. It's something else. It's another kind of sense altogether. And
I'm just
saying. But it's cute. Yeah. Damp Britain. You're right. So yes, of course they do. But the one time this dead person, I'm not going to give you the context, but the context is really funny. But this dead person asked me if I wanted to see myself the way he saw me, and he saw me as purely electrical.
Oh, wow.
Now, they don't all.
Yeah.
It's depth perceptions, how they want to focus, because they will see you exactly the way you look. Maybe they'll see more of your light, and they will invariably know who you are in a very deep way.
A range of choice that we typically don't have.
As we do have, we don't use it.
Call the people who have passed dead? That's kind of funny. It seems almost an antiquated word.
It is.
Are you just simply trying to make an impact on people?
I think so.
To wake them up
maybe
from
it's just
their
a belligerence from my
death?
part. But,
Okay. Right.
We have no words that are nice about death. I mean, the grave and the corpse and all of these words are lousy. The dead, necromancy, for God's sakes. I mean, all these words are heavy and macabre and sinister.
Yeah, exactly.
So
just
use with the old.
Disembodied or disincarnate are words that are used oftentimes in metaphysical.
But they're all dis words too.
True, because we're coming from a frame of reference of body.
And I don't
embodied,
like
yeah.
spirit and soul either, because then
Yeah.
you're moving into a small group of people who talk about spirit, who talk about soul, and you can say disembodied consciousness, but then that gets very clumsy.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
No, I'm getting...
We need new words.
See, yeah, definitely. We need a new vocabulary for this. It's just so interesting, you know. Are there more senses that those without a physical body, how's that for a clumsy phrase, for those without a physical body have that we don't have?
Oh, yeah.
You did mention synesthesia, which is a function of the senses that we know of, but are there others that we just don't know?
Sure. I mean, but they're hard to describe because we don't know them. But I mean, you can,
Yeah,
you know,
of course.
seeing light or smelling light would be a routine sort of thing
Right.
for them. But
Right.
But what sort of senses are you using when you decide to become part of a mathematical reality? For instance, the senses of enfolded dimensions, or senses of time that where they use time creatively. They don't regard time as real at all, which it isn't.
Right.
So they use it creatively.
Utterly plastic,
Yeah,
if you will.
absolutely plastic. And they can loop it, and they can intrude on your future. They can do all kinds of things from this position of out of body.
How does reincarnation, Julia, figure into this idea? Like, for instance, my mother passed a few years ago, and I did once have a medium who said, "Your mother's calling," you know, and she chatted and said things that really only my mother would have known, and it was a beautiful contact, really beautiful, and I so enjoyed it. But what if my mother decides to, or has already decided to, come back into human form? Let's say human.
Okay.
Okay.
Fine. This is the most common question, and this is where we go wrong.
Yes.
Your mother is, as we all are, all our incarnations are coming out of simultaneous time or non-time. Therefore, your mother, your afterlife mother, is your afterlife mother. Her incarnation is another creation. They're simultaneous. They're not on an evolutionary thing. You don't vacate one personality and take on another.
Oh, okay.
And to make matters even more complicated, it's very likely that everyone here in this room and everyone out there listening and seeing have incarnations who are in existence physically now. It's not...
As in parallel universes?
Yeah, no, as in maybe living 20 blocks away from you. Or in Idaho. Absolutely. A lot of them.
Okay. Say it again.
So that the movement of incarnations fans out in all sorts of different directions. You can have some kind of a life plan, or whatever you want to do cannot be done with just one body, so you split it up in several bodies. Or conversely, as an experiment, a difficult one in our world because we refuse to understand it, you can have one body with more than one personality.
Well, that is very multiple personality. That's all over the place.
And that's more recognized.
That's why I have 7 names.
As you should. And I don't think you should stop there. But it's a very poorly recognized phenomenon that your incarnations are simultaneous with you, that nothing dies. No part of your personality dies. I've had back-to-back after-death communication with 2 entities in the afterlife who were actually the same person, but one was from the Victorian era, the other one was from the now.
So when you say the same person, that's where it starts to get a little confusing.
But it is,
because,
or we could say the same soul.
Well, I was about to say, but you're kind of dissing just a single soul as an evolutionary unit.
Exactly. Thank you. Yes, the idea of evolution obviously depends on a cause and effect universe,
right?
And it depends on a time trajectory,
a linear
perspective. And none of those things exist. I mean, even physicists.
Well, they exist in that we've created them. They exist, but not
even the clock time is new. Medieval, since the second I think was invented about 100 or 200 years ago. So we're living with a completely artificial kind of time now.
Yeah.
And time is nothing more than how your nervous system organizes data. That's all.
In space.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah. Scientists are beginning to think that even space is just a perceptual trick. It may not be there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, but all these things, of course, are true when you're out of the body. You know all of this stuff,
Yeah.
that it's all, and so you can work with it. You can create space. You can create an ocean landscape if you want and be in it. That's not a problem. And it's there is no end to the creativity that's available.
So I'm riding the wave. I'm riding the wave. I get thrown back to ordinary things like the material world and
That.
or some conventional thinking such as karma.
Oh yeah.
So, to whom or to what does karma accrue or neutralize?
Do you mean karma, or you mean karmic debt specifically, right?
Both. All.
Research. This is you're gonna like this.
Yes. This is
By
sounding
a guy-
scientific.
Yeah, a guy named Ian Stevenson, University of Virginia, definitely the best of all incarnation researchers, as well as others who work more from a past regression angle. All these research avenues combined show that there is no such thing as karmic debt, which is obvious to me, since you cannot have karmic debt if you have simultaneous time. This banking system of paying, reward and payment is as old as time. It is not in Mesopotamia, it's not in native cultures or traditional cultures, but it's in cultures where you had centralized religions.
Centralized banking.
Yes, centralized banking is and then you start getting these
Probably the same.
reward and
Where the
punishment stuff.
centralized religions are, so was the banking.
Right. So it's a tally system.
Yeah.
So that's how it worked.
So how about the idea, Julia, that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction from physics, as that is related to the idea of karma? So I wasn't thinking just about karmic debt. I was thinking about the notion that a good deed begets another good deed, or
Yeah, there are resonances.
resonances, yes.
Right. But
Okay.
that's not an opposite reaction. That's a similar reaction. It's the same if you
That's
have
true.
two protons, two electrons, bond, and they both flip their orientation at the same time, no matter where the other one is after they're separated, no matter where the other one is in the
Yes.
universe.
Yes, yes,
so really,
yes.
it's more about unity and resonances than
Yes.
opposites.
Very true.
And so,
Very true. So what you're really saying is that from that study of Stevenson's and perhaps others, the whole notion of karma is a false one.
yeah, it's just about choice. It's just about choice.
So
And creativity
what about
and self-fulfillment
the idea
and-
of consequences? Taking it out of the, Hindu context, for instance, and just consequences to our actions.
If it weren't a situation where, first of all, if we do something wrong and we get punished for it, we may develop a thing that looks on the outside like morality, but really all it is fear. You're not in touch with yourself, you're a punished person, you're outcasted, all this kind of stuff. What really creates morality is deep self-forgiveness and self-realization. And that's what goes on. In the afterlife, if you want, I still don't like that word, but you have to use
sure.
it, is all about that. It's all about forgiveness. In fact, we have incidences.
Post-corporeal existence.
Yeah. We have
PCE.
Post-mortem existence. That's cheerful. We have instances
stick with
of murderers
corporeal.
lying on their deathbed and the people they've murdered coming in before the person dies to forgive them. That's how strong the impulse to forgive. Real forgiveness leads back to your authentic self.
Yeah.
Once you have that, you have morality again.
Definitely.
This punishment and reward system is
No,
never worked.
I'm with you. So I would add, and I'd like to hear what you have to say, apology and forgiveness. Apology, because they both bring you into a state of humility,
Yeah.
of dropping your stuff,
Yeah.
your ego, what
Right,
have you,
right.
your self-preoccupation,
Right.
to reach out and connect with another heart.
And this is really what the strongest impulse is for those folks on the other side, is to deliver that apology in the remorse, and they will stay for decades trying to get through to somebody to do that. And that's where a lot of my work comes in. It ends up being like a family therapy.
That's
and
awesome.
sometimes the people they're exhibiting remorse for are also dead, but they can't reach each other. So it's pretty complex stuff.
We've got to bring Alexander Graham Bell over there, I guess.
He was working on some kind of communication system before he died.
Listen, I just thank you so much from the bottom of my soul for this good work that you're doing.
It's such a pleasure to
Sure.
be with you.
I'm so glad.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Julia Assante, The Last Frontier, exploring the afterlife, and you know what she really feels about that now, and transforming our fear of death. So pick it up. We actually have it on we'll have it on our website. So thanks again for joining me and us, and get in touch at mjr@abetterworld.net. Let us know your thoughts, feelings, and your comments. Visit us on our website, www.abetterworld.tv. I look forward to seeing you all next week.